The iron skillet caught Magnolia square across her temple, sending her crashing into the rough-hewn cabin wall as stars exploded behind her eyes. Blood trickled down her cheek, mixing with tears she refused to shed as Jeremiah towered over her. His face twisted with the familiar rage that had become her daily torment. "Worthless as tits on a boar," he snarled, already turning away to where Prudence sat smugly at the kitchen table, her swollen belly a testament to what Magnolia could never give him. "At least my second wife knows how to keep her mouth shut." And her womb full. Magnolia pressed herself against the wall, watching through swollen eyes as Jeremiah's calloused hands moved possessively over Prudence's shoulders. The younger woman's satisfied smile cut deeper than any physical blow. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of trying to please a man who seemed born to find fault, and now she was nothing more than an unwanted burden in her own home. "Get out to the barn," Jeremiah commanded without looking at her. "Sleep with the animals where you belong. Prudence needs her rest, and I won't have you disturbing her with your sniveling." The autumn wind bit through Magnolia's thin dress as she stumbled across the yard, her bare feet finding every sharp stone and broken twig. The barn smelled of hay and horse sweat, familiar scents that had become her refuge more often than not. She curled up in an empty stall, pulling moth-eaten blankets around her trembling frame. 23 years old and already feeling ancient, Magnolia stared up at the stars through gaps in the roof. Her parents had died of fever when she was 16, leaving her with nothing but a small plot of land that Jeremiah had been eager to claim along with her hand. She'd thought herself lucky then, grateful for security and a roof over her head. Now she understood she'd simply traded one form of survival for another. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her freeze. Raiders had been spotted near Willow Creek, and traveling merchants rarely came this far north after dark. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows as the horses stopped just outside the barn. "The smoke from their chimney is fresh," a voice said in accented English. "Someone's awake." Magnolia's blood ran cold. Apache. She'd heard the stories, seen the aftermath of their raids on neighboring settlements. But instead of the war whoops and gunfire she expected, there was only the soft creak of leather and the gentle snort of horses. A shadow filled the barn doorway, and moonlight caught the glint of long black hair and bronze skin. The warrior stepped inside, moving with the fluid grace of a predator, his dark eyes scanning the interior before settling on her huddled form. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then his gaze took in her bruised face, her torn dress, the way she cowered in the straw like a beaten animal. Something shifted in his expression, a recognition that transcended language and culture. "What is your name?" he asked quietly, his English carefully pronounced. "Magnolia," she whispered, surprised by her own honesty. He nodded slowly, as if her name held some significance she couldn't understand. "I am called Ayanna, and you will not spend another night sleeping with animals." Magnolia's heart hammered against her ribs as the Apache warrior Ayanna extended his hand toward her. Every instinct screamed danger, yet something in his dark eyes held a gentleness she hadn't seen in years. Before she could decide whether to flee or trust, the barn door burst open. "What in the blazes?" Jeremiah's bellow died in his throat as he took in the scene. His face went white, then red with fury. "Get away from my wife, you savage!" Ayanna turned slowly, deliberately, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "Your wife sleeps in a barn while you warm your bed with another woman. This is not the way of a man. You don't know nothing about being a man," Jeremiah spat, raising the shotgun he'd grabbed from the cabin. Behind him, Prudence peered out nervously, her hands protective over her belly. "Now get off my land before I fill you full of buckshot." The warrior's laugh was low and dangerous. "Your land?" He gestured around the modest homestead. This was My grandfather's hunting ground. Your fences and buildings are the intrusion here." Magnolia watched in fascination as Ayanna stepped closer to Jeremiah, seemingly unconcerned by the weapon pointed at his chest. There was something magnificent about him, the proud set of his shoulders, the way he moved like flowing water, the quiet authority in his voice. "You beat women and call yourself strong," Ayanna continued, his accent thickening with emotion. "You take what is not yours and claim it by right. In my tribe, such a man would be cast out to die alone." Jeremiah's finger twitched on the trigger. But before he could fire, 2 more Apache warriors materialized from the darkness like ghosts. The shotgun suddenly seemed very small in Jeremiah's trembling hands. "Now, let's all just calm down," he stammered, backing toward the cabin. "I don't want no trouble. Take what you want from the barn, just leave us be." "What I want," Ayanna said quietly, his eyes never leaving Magnolia's face, "is not yours to give." The meaning behind his words struck her like lightning. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a woman he desires, not as a possession or a burden, but as something precious to be protected. When was the last time anyone had looked at her that way? "You can't just take my wife." Jeremiah's voice cracked with hysteria. "A wife who sleeps in straw while her husband shares his bed with another?" Ayanna's contempt was palpable. "You have already thrown her away. I merely offer her a choice." He turned back to Magnolia, his voice gentle again. "You can come with me freely, or stay and continue to live as less than the animals you sleep beside. But know this, if you choose to come, you will never be harmed again. This I swear by the spirits of my ancestors." Magnolia stared at this stranger who had appeared like something from a dream. Everything logical told her to be afraid, to cling to the devil she knew rather than trust an unknown fate. But her cheek still throbbed from Jeremiah's blow, and her heart still ached from years of rejection and cruelty. She began, then stopped. Through the barn door, she could see Prudence watching from the cabin window, one hand on her swollen belly, secure in her position as the favored wife. The woman who had taken her place without a trace of guilt or regret. Magnolia thought of all the nights she'd lain alone, all the meals she'd eaten in silence while Jeremiah lavished attention on his second wife. She thought of the children she'd never been able to give him, the love that had slowly died under the weight of his disappointment and rage. Then she looked at Ayanna again, at the promise in his dark eyes and the strength in his warrior's frame. Perhaps it was madness, but what did she have to lose that hadn't already been taken from her? Slowly, she reached out and took his offered hand. The moment Magnolia's fingers touched his, Ayanna felt a jolt of recognition that went deeper than attraction. Her hand was small and work-roughened, marked by old scars and fresh cuts, but it fit perfectly in his larger palm. Without breaking eye contact, he helped her rise from the straw. "You're making the biggest mistake of your worthless life," Jeremiah shouted, but his voice carried more fear than conviction. The 2 Apache warriors flanking him kept their weapons lowered, but ready, their presence a silent threat that needed no translation. Magnolia swayed on her feet, whether from her injuries or the magnitude of her decision, Ayanna couldn't tell. Instinctively, he placed his free hand on her waist to steady her, feeling her flinch at the contact before she relaxed against him. "Gather what matters to you," he told her quietly. "We leave now, before more of your people come with guns and foolish courage." She looked around the barn, then shook her head. "There's nothing here that's truly mine. Everything I owned became his when we married." The simple statement revealed more about her life than hours of explanation could have. Ayanna had heard of the white man's marriage customs, how women became property to be owned and discarded. Among his people, the Apache, women held power and respect. A man who struck his wife would face the wrath of her entire clan. "Then we go," he said simply. As they moved toward the barn door, Prudence came waddling out of the cabin, her face flushed with indignation. You can't just steal another man's wife. What kind of Christian woman abandons her husband for a heathen savage? Magnolia stopped dead, and for a moment Ayanna thought she might change her mind. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and looked directly at the woman who had replaced her in Jaramir's bed. The kind who's tired of being treated worse than livestock, she replied with quiet dignity. Enjoy your marriage, Prudence. I pray you never learn what I've learned about the man you think you love. Prudence's face went pale, but before she could respond, Jaramir grabbed her arm and pulled her back. Let the ungrateful bitch go, he snarled. Good riddance to bad rubbish. She was never worth the trouble anyway. Ayanna felt Magnolia's fingers tighten on his, and he squeezed back reassuringly. The white man's words were meant to wound, but they only confirmed what he already knew. She was leaving behind nothing but pain. Outside the barn, 3 horses waited in the moonlight. Ayanna's stallion, a magnificent paint with intelligent eyes, stood beside 2 smaller mares. Without asking permission, he lifted Magnolia onto his own mount, then swung up behind her. The feel of her slight body pressed against his chest stirred something protective and possessive in his warrior's heart. She smelled of hay and fear and something uniquely feminine that made his pulse quicken. When she leaned back against him, trusting him to keep her safe, he felt a fierce satisfaction that had nothing to do with victory in battle. Where are we going? She asked as they began to ride, her voice barely audible over the sound of hoofbeats. To my winter camp, 3 days' ride to the north, he replied. My people will welcome you if you prove worthy of welcome. And if I don't? He considered the question seriously. Then I will build you a lodge of your own and protect you until you choose your own path. But I believe you are stronger than you know, Magnolia. The woman who had the courage to leave everything. Familiar has the spirit to begin again. She was quiet for a long moment, her body gradually relaxing against his as the miles passed. Finally, she spoke again, her voice thoughtful. Why did you come to the homestead tonight? Were you planning to raid it? No, he admitted. I was scouting for the cavalry that has been hunting my band. I saw the light in your cabin window and came to investigate, finding you. That was the will of the spirits. You don't even know me, she said softly. How can you be sure you want me? Ayanna smiled in the darkness, breathing in the scent of her hair. I know enough. I know you have endured pain without breaking. I know you chose freedom over fear. And I know that when you looked at me, you saw a man, not a monster. Behind them, the lights of the homestead faded into the night, taking with them the last traces of Magnolia's old life. Dawn painted the desert sky in shades of rose and gold as they made camp beside a hidden spring. Magnolia slid from the horse on trembling legs, her body aching from the long night's ride and the unfamiliar position. She'd never traveled so far from home, and every mile had taken her deeper into a world she didn't understand. Ayanna moved with efficient grace, tending to the horses while his 2 companions, whom he'd introduced as Nalnish and Hastian, gathered wood for a small fire. She stood awkwardly to one side, unsure of her place or purpose in their routine. Sit, Ayanna instructed gently, gesturing to a flat boulder near the spring. You need water and food. The cool, clear water was the sweetest thing she'd ever tasted. As she cupped it in her palms, she caught sight of her reflection and gasped. The bruise on her cheek had darkened to an ugly purple, and her lip was split where Jaramir's ring had caught it. She looked exactly like what she was, a battered woman fleeing into the wilderness with strangers. Does it hurt badly? Ayanna asked, settling beside her with surprising quietness for such a large man. I've had worse, she admitted, then immediately regretted the confession. It revealed too much about the life she'd left behind. His jaw tightened. No woman should ever have to say those words. From his pack, he withdrew a small pouch of what looked like crushed herbs. Mixing it with water from the spring, he created a paste that smelled of sage and something medicinal. "May I?" he asked. Holding up the mixture, she nodded, holding perfectly still as his fingers gently applied the paste to her bruises. His touch was incredibly tender, nothing like the rough handling she'd grown accustomed to from Jeremiah. When he was finished, he didn't immediately pull away, instead studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse race. "Beautiful," he murmured, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. "I'm nothing special," she protested automatically. "Plain as dishwater," Jeremiah always said. Ayanna's eyes flashed with anger. "Your husband was blind as well as cruel. You have." The grace of the desert rose delicate but strong enough to bloom in harsh places. Heat flooded her cheeks at the compliment. No one had called her beautiful in years, certainly not with such conviction. She looked away, overwhelmed by emotions she'd thought were dead inside her. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. "You don't owe me anything." "In my tribe, we believe the spirits guide us to the people we need to meet," he replied. "When I saw you in that barn, broken but not defeated, I knew you were meant to be part of my life. Call it destiny, call it the will of the Creator, I only know that you belong with me now." The certainty in his voice was both thrilling and terrifying. "I don't know anything about your world, your customs. I might disappoint you like I disappointed him." Ayanna turned her face back to his with gentle fingers. "You could never disappoint me by being yourself." The woman who survived years of cruelty and still had the courage to trust a stranger, that woman has nothing to prove to anyone. Nalnish approached with strips of dried meat and what looked like flat bread made from corn. The food was unfamiliar but nourishing, and Magnolia realized she was ravenous. She'd grown so accustomed to eating Jeremiah's leftovers that a proper meal felt like a luxury. "Rest now," Ayanna said when she'd finished eating. "We travel again at sunset to avoid the heat and any cavalry patrols that might be searching for us." He spread a blanket in the shade of a large boulder and gestured for her to lie down. When she hesitated, he seemed to understand her uncertainty. "I will not touch you without permission," he promised solemnly. "You are safe here, Magnolia. Sleep without fear." Exhaustion finally overcame her anxiety, and she curled up on the blanket. Just before sleep claimed her, she felt the weight of another blanket being carefully tucked around her shoulders. Through her lashes, she glimpsed Ayanna settling nearby, positioning himself between her and the open desert like a guardian watching over something precious. For the first time in years, Magnolia fell asleep feeling truly safe. The Apache winter camp materialized from the landscape like something from a dream. Wikiup dome-shaped structures covered in hides and brush dotted a sheltered valley between red rock formations. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and the sound of children's laughter carried on the evening air. Magnolia had imagined something more primitive, more savage, but this looked like a thriving community. Her arrival caused quite a stir. Women emerged from their lodges to stare, their dark eyes curious but not unkind. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts, fascinated by her pale skin and light brown hair. The men watched with more reserve, their expressions unreadable. "They're wondering what their war leader plans to do with a white woman," Ayanna explained quietly as he helped her dismount. "Some will welcome you, others will need time to accept your presence." An elderly woman approached, her silver hair braided with turquoise beads, her weathered face marked by intelligence and authority. She spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing toward Magnolia while keeping her eyes fixed on Ayanna. "My grandmother, Nazaba," he said by way of introduction. "She says you look half dead and wonders if I've brought home a burden or a blessing." The old woman stepped closer, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of Magnolia's appearance, the fading bruises, the torn dress, the way she held herself like someone expecting another blow. Then, surprisingly, Nazaba reached out and gently touched the healing cut on Magnolia's lip. She spoke again, her voice softer this time. She says the spirits sometimes send us gifts wrapped in suffering, Ayana translated. She wants to know if you're here by choice or by force. Magnolia straightened, meeting the elder's penetrating gaze. By choice, she said clearly, though. Her voice shook slightly. I chose to come. Nazaba nodded approvingly and barked something that sounded like orders. Several younger women hurried forward, chattering in Apache as they surrounded Magnolia. They're going to help you bathe and find proper clothes, Ayana said. My grandmother has claimed you as her responsibility until you find your place among us. What does that mean? Magnolia asked, suddenly nervous about being separated from the one person she could communicate with. It means you're under the protection of the most respected woman in our band, he replied with a slight smile. No one will dare harm you or question your presence here. She's giving you time to heal and decide what kind of life you want to build. The women led her to a natural hot spring hidden among the rocks. They chattered constantly in their musical language, their hands gentle as they helped her out of her tattered dress. Magnolia had expected to feel embarrassed, but these women treated her body's marks of abuse with matter-of-fact sympathy, as if they'd seen such things before. The hot water felt like heaven against her aching muscles. They washed her hair with sweet-smelling soap made from yucca root, working out tangles with patient fingers. One woman, who looked to be about Magnolia's age, kept trying to communicate through gestures and broken English. Itzel, the woman said, pointing to herself. Then she pointed to Magnolia with a questioning expression. Magnolia, she replied, and watched the women practice pronouncing it, their faces scrunched with concentration. When they finally emerged from the spring, Itzel presented her with a beautiful dress made of soft deerskin, decorated with intricate beadwork in blues and greens. It fit perfectly, and for the first time in years, Magnolia felt truly feminine. The reflection she glimpsed in the still water showed a different woman still marked by recent pain, but somehow more alive, more herself. As evening fell, she was brought to Nazaba's wickiup for the evening meal. Ayana was there, looking magnificent in the firelight, his bronze skin gleaming and his dark hair falling loose around his shoulders. When he saw her in the Apache dress, his eyes widened with unmistakable desire. You look. He began in English, then switched to Apache, speaking to his grandmother with obvious reverence. The old woman cackled and said something that made several other people laugh. What did she say? Magnolia asked, blushing under his intense stare. She said even a blind man could see that the spirit sent you to be my woman, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. And she asked when I planned to make it official. The implication hung in the air between them like smoke from the fire. Marriage, but not the kind she'd known before. This would be a partnership between equals, a union blessed by an entire community. Rather than a legal transaction transferring property from one man to another. And what did you tell her? Magnolia whispered. That the choice belongs to you, he said simply. I will wait as long as necessary for your heart to heal and your trust to grow. But know this, I want you as my wife, Magnolia. Not because you need protection, but because you make me whole in ways I never expected. 3 weeks passed like a fever dream of new experiences and gradual healing. Magnolia learned to make baskets from pine needles to prepare traditional foods like acorn meal and roasted agave, and to speak basic Apache phrases that made the children giggle when she mispronounced them. Her bruises faded to yellow shadows, then disappeared entirely, leaving behind only the inner scars that would take longer to heal. Ayana was courting her in the Apache way with patience, respect, and small gifts that showed he was paying attention to her needs. He brought her soft rabbit fur to line her moccasins, turquoise beads for her hair, and once a small carved wooden bird that fit perfectly in her palm. In my vision quest as a young man, he explained as she examined the carving, by firelight, I was guided by a meadowlark who led me away from danger. She was small and seemed fragile, but her song was the strongest thing in all the desert. When I look at you, I remember that bird. The comparison made her eyes burn with unshed tears. No one had ever seen strength in her perceived weakness before, had ever suggested that survival itself was a form of courage, but it was the way he treated her in daily life that truly won her heart. He asked for her opinions, listened when she spoke, and never raised his voice in anger even when she made mistakes. When nightmares about Jeremiah woke her crying, he would sit beside her wickiup and sing softly in Apache until she calmed down, never trying to touch or comfort her unless she asked. The other women had accepted her with varying degrees of warmth. Itzel had become a true friend, teaching her practical skills while sharing stories about her own children and husband. Naza Abba remained stern but fair, occasionally nodding approval when Magnolia mastered a new task or showed kindness to the camp's elderly members. It was during one of these peaceful moments grinding corn with the other women while the children played nearby that everything changed. Hastian came galloping into camp, his horse lathered with sweat, his face grim with urgent news. He spoke rapidly to Ayanna in Apache, gesturing toward the south. Magnolia watched her protector's expression darken as he listened, her stomach knotting. With instinctive dread, "What is it?" she asked when Hastian finished his report. "Cavalry patrol, 2 days' ride south," Ayanna replied tersely. "They're asking questions in the settlements about a missing white woman. Your husband has put out word that you were kidnapped by hostiles." The implications hit her like a physical blow. "He's coming for me." "Not him personally," Ayanna said, his hand moving unconsciously to his weapons. "But the soldiers will come. They'll use his story as an excuse to attack our camp, kill our warriors, take our women and children to the reservation." Around them, the camp was already transforming from peaceful village to war party. Men checked their weapons while women began packing essential belongings. Children who had been laughing moments before now clung to their mothers with wide, frightened eyes. "I have to go back," Magnolia said quietly. "I won't let innocent people die because of my choices." "No." Ayanna's voice was flat with absolute refusal. "You'll go back to a man who beats you, possibly to hang for adultery or some other false charge." "I won't allow it. You don't own me." The words burst out before she could stop them, born from years of being told what she could and couldn't do. Instead of anger, understanding flickered in his dark eyes. "You're right. I don't own you. But I love you, and love means protecting what matters most, even from their own noble impulses." The declaration stopped her cold. Love. The word she'd given up hoping to hear, especially spoken with such fierce conviction. "Ayanna, marry me," he said urgently, dropping to one knee before her. "Tonight, in the Apache way. Become my wife in truth, and I'll have the right to fight for you. Our children will be Apache, protected by tribal law. No white man's court will be able to separate us." Around them, the preparations for departure continued, but Magnolia was aware only of the man kneeling before her, offering his heart and his life with simple, devastating honesty. "The soldiers," she began, "will find an empty camp and old tracks leading in 12 different directions," he interrupted. "My people are masters of vanishing when necessary. But first, give me your answer. Will you be my wife, Magnolia?" "Will. You let me love and protect you for the rest of our days?" Looking into his eyes, she saw her future stretching ahead like a path through beautiful, dangerous country. There would be challenges, hardships, moments when she missed the familiar comforts of her old world. But there would also be love, respect, children raised in freedom, and the daily joy of being truly valued for who she was rather than what she could provide. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you." His smile was brighter than the sun rising over the desert. The Apache marriage ceremony was unlike anything Magnolia had ever imagined. As the sun set behind the red rocks, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, the entire band gathered in a circle around the central fire. Nazaba had spent the afternoon preparing both bride and groom, painting sacred symbols on their faces with white clay and red ochre. The markings represent the 4 directions and the sacred mountains of our people, Ayana explained as his grandmother worked. They asked the spirits to bless our union with children, prosperity, and long life together. Magnolia wore a new dress that the women had worked frantically to complete, white doeskin decorated with silver concos and elaborate beadwork that caught the firelight like captured stars. Ayana was magnificent in a traditional warrior's outfit, his chest bare except for a breastplate made of bone and turquoise, his powerful frame radiating strength and purpose. The ceremony began with the eldest medicine man calling upon the 4 directions and the spirits of the ancestors. Though Magnolia couldn't understand the words, she felt the power in them, the weight of tradition and sacred promise. When it came time for the vows, Ayana spoke first in Apache, then translated for her benefit. "I promise to protect you with my life, to provide for your needs, to honor your wisdom and strength. I take you as my equal partner, my beloved companion. The mother of the children we will raise together in the old way." Her own vows were simpler, but no less heartfelt. "I promise to stand beside you in all seasons, to share your burdens and your joys. I choose you freely, with my whole heart, as my husband and the father of my children." The binding ritual involved braiding their wrists together with leather cords while the medicine man chanted blessings. Then they shared sacred corn mush from the same bowl, symbolizing their commitment to share all of life's sustenance. Finally, Nazaba brought out a beautiful basket decorated with butterfly designs, a gift that represented transformation and the beauty that could emerge from life's darkest moments. But even as they celebrated, the reality of their situation pressed close. Scouts had brought word that the cavalry was closer than expected, perhaps only 1 day behind them. The marriage feast was brief, the dancing subdued by necessity. "We'll have to separate," Ayana told her as they packed the last of their belongings by moonlight. "Small groups can move faster and leave less trail. I'm sending you north with Nazaba and the other women while I lead the men south to confuse the soldiers." "No," Magnolia said firmly. "I won't be separated from you on our wedding night, possibly forever. If we're truly married, truly partners, then we face this together. It's too dangerous, more dangerous than staying with Jeremiah would have." "Been?" she interrupted. "More dangerous than living without hope, without love, without the man who just promised to." Ayana stared at her for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time the steel core that had enabled her to survive years of abuse without breaking completely. "You're not the same woman I found in that barn." "No," she agreed. "That woman was afraid to claim what she wanted. Your wife isn't." The transformation in her was remarkable. The cowering, beaten creature Jeremiah had created was gone, replaced by someone who had remembered her own worth. Love had done that, not just Ayana's. Love for her, but her growing love for herself, for the life she was choosing to build. "Then we travel together," he conceded. "But if I say run, you run. If I say hide, you hide. Your safety is more important than anything else." They rode out before dawn, 23 Apache men, women, and children moving through the desert like ghosts. Behind them, they left a cold camp and deliberately confusing trails designed to send the soldiers in circles for days. For 3 days. They traveled through country so rugged it seemed impossible that anything human could cross it. But Ayana and his warriors knew every hidden water source, every passage through the rocks, every game trail that could conceal their passage. Magnolia learned to read the land as they did, to find beauty in its harsh grandeur, to understand why his people would fight and die rather than be confined to a reservation. On the fourth morning, they reached a series of caves high in the mountains, invisible from below and accessible only by a narrow trail that could be easily defended. Other Apache were already there, refugees from different bands who had fled the army's relentless pursuit. "We'll be safe here through the winter," Ayana assured her as they made camp in a spacious cavern. "Come spring, we'll decide whether to try for Mexico or find another way to live free." That night, alone in their private alcove within the cave system, they finally consummated their marriage. Ayana was tender and patient, coaxing responses from her body that she'd never known were possible. When she cried at the overwhelming combination of physical pleasure and emotional release, he held her close and whispered words of love in both languages until she quieted. "I never knew it could be like this," she confessed, tracing the scars on his chest from old battles. "This is how it should be between a man and woman," he replied. "This is what you deserved. All spring came to the mountains with a riot of wildflowers, and the sweet sound of snowmelt rushing through hidden canyons." Magnolia woke each morning in her husband's arms, still marveling at the transformation in her life. The caves had become a temporary village where Apache from different bands shared resources and knowledge, preparing for whatever challenges the new season might bring. She was grinding acorns into meal when Nalnish came running into the camp, his face bright with excitement. He spoke rapidly to Ayana, gesturing toward the trail that led down from their mountain stronghold. "What is it?" Magnolia asked, setting aside her work. "Riders coming up the mountain," Ayana replied, his expression tense. "But not cavalry. They're flying a white flag." The delegation that eventually appeared was not what anyone expected. 3 men on horseback, a cavalry captain, a federal marshal, and to Magnolia's shock, Jeremiah himself, looking haggard and older than his 35 years. The Apache warriors were ready for treachery, but the white men kept their weapons holstered and their hands visible. When they were close enough to speak, the captain called out in English, "We're here to parley under a flag of truce. We want to speak with the woman known as Magnolia Hutchins." "I am Magnolia," she called back, stepping forward despite Ayana's protective gesture, "though my name is different now." Jeremiah's face went red with rage when he saw her. She was barely recognizable as the broken woman he'd driven from his home 6 months ago. Her skin glowed with health, her hair shone in elaborate Apache braids decorated with silver and turquoise, and she carried herself with quiet dignity. The doeskin dress she wore displayed a figure that had filled out with proper nutrition and the confidence that came from being truly loved. "You're coming home with me," he declared. "This whole charade ends now. This is my home," she replied calmly. "And you are not my husband. I divorced you according to Apache law and married a better man." The marshal stepped forward, his voice more reasonable. "Mrs. Hutchins, I understand you may have been influenced by your captors, but legally, your marriage to Mr. Hutchins still stands. Apache ceremonies aren't recognized by territorial law. Then perhaps territorial law needs to change," she suggested. "I'm here by choice, Marshal. I've broken no laws, stolen nothing, harmed no one. By what right do you demand I return to a man who beat me and threw me out of his own house?" "She's been turned against her own people," Jeremiah insisted, "brainwashed by savages into forgetting her Christian duty. She needs proper medical attention, maybe time in an asylum to recover her senses." The threat in his words was unmistakable. An asylum where inconvenient wives could be locked away and declared insane by husbands who wanted to be rid of them. Magnolia felt a chill of fear, but before she could respond, Ayanna stepped beside her, his presence radiating controlled menace. "My wife stays where she chooses to stay," he said in clear English. "Any man who tries to take her against her must first kill me." "That can be arranged," Jeremiah snarled, his hand moving toward his gun. The cavalry captain quickly intervened. "Nobody's killing anybody today. We came here to resolve this peacefully." He studied Magnolia with shrewd eyes. "Ma'am, I have to ask, are you being held against your will? If you want to leave with us, just say so. We'll guarantee you're safe." Passage. It was the moment of truth. Around her, she could feel the tension radiating from the Apache warriors, ready to fight and die to protect her if necessary. Ayanna stood motionless beside her, but she could see the strain in his jaw, the way his hand rested casually near his knife. "Captain," she said clearly, "I want you to understand something. 6 months ago, I was sleeping in a barn because my husband preferred his second wife's company to mine. I was beaten, starved, and treated worse than livestock. These people, these supposed savages, took me in, healed my wounds, and gave me dignity. My Apache husband has never raised his hand to me in anger, never spoken to me with cruelty, never made me feel worthless." She gestured to the children playing nearby, the women going about their daily tasks, the men who had risked everything to protect a white stranger. "This is civilization, gentlemen. Not your courts that would force a woman back into the hands of her abuser, not your laws that treat wives like property to be reclaimed." "Pretty words," the marshal said, "but you're still a white woman living with hostiles. There are folks back in the settlements mighty concerned about what example this sets. Then perhaps those folks should concern themselves with why white women run away to begin with," she replied sharply. Jeremiah's face was purple with rage. "I've got rights. She's legally my wife, and I want her back. Your rights ended when you threw me out of my own home to make room for your pregnant mistress," Magnolia said, her voice steady despite the pain of the memories. "Tell me, Jeremiah, how is dear Prudence? Did she give you the son you wanted so desperately?" Something flickered in his eyes, guilt, shame, or perhaps simple embarrassment. "That's none of your business anymore." "I see," she said softly. "Let me guess. The baby died, or perhaps it was a girl. Prudence lost her value the same way I did, didn't she? And now you think you can just come collect your first wife like a discarded tool you suddenly need again." The accuracy of her guess was written all over his face. Behind him, even the captain and marshal looked uncomfortable with the obvious truth of the situation. "I can offer you money," Jeremiah said desperately. "A new house in town, servants, whatever you want. Just come back and we'll start over." "I don't want your money," Magnolia replied. "I want what I have here: respect, love, children who will grow up free, and a husband who chose me because he wanted me, not because he needed a housekeeper and broodmare." She placed her hand over her still flat stomach, and Ayanna's eyes widened with understanding and joy. She'd only been certain for a few days, but there was no better time to make the announcement. "I'm carrying an Apache child," she said, watching the men's faces change. "Your grandchild, if you want to claim kinship. A baby who will be raised in two worlds with the best of both cultures." The marshal and captain exchanged glances. A pregnant woman changed everything. It would be political suicide to drag her away from her chosen husband and people, especially when she was clearly there voluntarily. "This conversation is over," Ayanna said firmly. "You've heard my wife's choice. Honor it or face the consequences." For a moment, violence hung in the air like storm clouds. Then the captain nodded slowly. "Ma'am, I can't force you to leave if you truly don't want to. But I have to ask one more time, are you absolutely certain this is your choice? I've never been more certain of anything in my life, she replied. The three white men turned their horses around and began the descent down the mountain. Just before they disappeared from sight, Jeremiah looked back once, his face a mask of baffled rage and wounded pride. You'll regret this, he shouted. When winter comes and you're starving in some godforsaken wilderness, remember you could have been safe in a real home. I am in my real home, she called back, and I'm finally safe. As the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, Ayanna pulled her into his arms, his hands protective over her belly. A baby, he murmured in wonder. When? Late autumn, I think. Are you happy? His smile was radiant. I'm the happiest man in all the territories. A son or daughter who will grow up knowing both worlds, strong in both traditions. The spirits have blessed us beyond measure. Around them, the Apache camp erupted in celebration as word of the pregnancy spread. Children ran laughing between the cooking fires.
Women began planning the ceremonial items they would need for the birth.
And the men spoke of the hunting they would do to provide meat for the new mother. That night, as they lay together under a blanket of stars, Magnolia thought about the journey that had brought her here. From broken victim to beloved wife, from despair to hope, from sleeping with animals to carrying the child of a warrior who loved her beyond reason. Do you ever regret leaving your old life? Ayanna asked softly. She considered the question seriously, thinking of the woman she'd been afraid, worthless in her own eyes, convinced she deserved no better than scraps from another woman's table. Never, she whispered. That wasn't living, it was just surviving. This is the first life I've ever had that feels real, that feels mine. 5 years later, when their two children played in the golden grass of a hidden valley while she gathered herbs for the evening meal, Magnolia would remember this moment as the true beginning of her story. Not the night she'd been beaten and thrown into a barn, but this one when she'd chosen love over fear, freedom over safety, and her own worth over society's expectations. She'd found her happy ending not in being rescued, but in rescuing herself, and in the arms of a man who'd seen her strength when she'd forgotten she had any. She'd discovered that sometimes the best love stories begin with the simple words, "You're mine now," not as possession, but as recognition, as homecoming, as two souls finally finding their way to where they belonged.